Most pianists never reach their favorite pieces because they just stop as soon as progress slows down. But what if I told you that you're only a single year away from playing your dream pieces? And the only thing that stands in your way is to practice more deliberately. There's this one difference as you get older with practicing that makes it way more difficult to practice. And that's the fact that it gets more difficult to make piano playing enjoyable. For kids who play the piano for the first time, just hitting the notes is already extremely exciting. But once you're an adult, for example, you have these dream pieces you want to play, and you have this feeling that as long as you're not playing them, anything is less enjoyable and it's just a way to get to your goals. But I'm actually going to tell you that that is totally fine. The only thing I believe you should do is just to get there in the fastest way possible, knowing that you will get there within a year if you practice deliberately. Just trust me on this, that once you cross that bridge and you get a little bit better to the point where you're playing pieces you fully enjoy, that are played in common repertoire and pieces you would actually listen to yourself, progress will become much easier. But the goal is to cross that bridge first. I'm not going to waste much time and I'm just going to make it as actionable as possible. There's 3 things you need to implement. The first one is going to be a technique warm-up. The second one is you're going to need to implement more Bach. And then the third one is going to be the way you practice your pieces. So let me start with the technique warm-up. This is called a warm-up, but it's really not that. It's just a way to practice your technique. What you're gonna do is you're gonna pick a technique book, and with that technique book, you're gonna practice in 2 ways. The first method includes that you're gonna practice as loud as possible and just press down on the keys as hard as you can, while the second one involves an opposite touch where you're just gonna tap the key very lightly. So don't be afraid to move on too quickly. Just your minimum requirements are to play all of your notes at a final speed where it sounds like the actual piece. And don't worry if this is a little bit confusing. The first link in the description is a document where I walk you through every step in a more detailed way. And the second step is to practice more Bach. From now on, I want you to play 2 pieces at the same time. One Bach, and then a piece that's sort of your choice, but keep the level easy, please. I'll put on screen which pieces to play depending on the difficulty, but just trust me on this, there's no better way to speed up your reading practice, your understanding of the music, and just your overall pianistic ability, like control and evenness, by practicing Bach. The goal is to extract as much progress out of these pieces, because remember, they're not your performance pieces yet. They're just pieces that are designed to help you progress to the next. For now, don't worry too much about musical refinement. Our goal for now is just to progress as quickly as possible to those dream pieces. But let me immediately get to how to practice, because I believe that is the most important part. As you practice these pieces, so your Bach and then your other piece of choice, you're gonna come across a lot of difficulties. For example, unevenness of fingers. For that, you should implement the technique practice I just talked about in my first step. But there's a lot of other problems, so let me just quickly go about them and then tell you how to solve these symptoms. For example, if you're currently at a stage where hand imbalance is a little bit of an issue for you, just practice hands separate. If you feel like your playing is a little bit rushed, you should add a metronome. Or if you feel like you're tense all the time, you should try to practice with relaxation. So never put in any tension in the keys and just play as relaxed as possible. But in general, the way to practice should always be to keep the tempo below the slowest part of the piece you can play. This is the most disciplined way to practice and will have you gradually increasing your tempo and improving your technique. Because the thing is, you can't force that growth within your hands and fingers. It just naturally needs time. Which brings me to the next part, which is that consistency is so incredibly important, even more in piano than whatever else. Because piano practice is all about having that daily habit, not about the total hours practiced. And this is something you might have heard before, that people tell you, being like, oh, just put in 10 minutes a day and you'll already improve. But it goes much deeper than that. The reason this works so well is because your hand naturally needs to learn these new movements that it's not designed to do. And it turns out there's just no substitute for having that daily reminder. Even just skipping a day a week already is a huge detriment to your progress. Even if it's just a 10-minute session you would have done instead, you might have gotten 2 times as much out of that week, which seems crazy to think about, but it's really the case. I've experienced it, and there's literally been times where my piano teacher has asked me, did you only practice 6 times this week instead of 7? Because my hands were getting more sluggish. And this is just such an annoying part of piano playing, and there's really no way to avoid it. Just that daily practice is extremely important, and I highly recommend you to get in at least those 10 minutes a day. And the next thing I want to tell you about when it comes to practicing pieces just comes down to knowing what is most efficient. The first thing you should do when playing a piece is immediately try to memorize it while reading. This will already speed up your progress so much. But what actually drives progress when practicing a piece is going to those hard parts where you're struggling and really refining those, which just comes down to practicing technique basically. And sometimes it's more useful to get 80% out of the piece than 100 because you can always come back to this piece later when you've gotten the entire knowledge of the piece from playing different pieces that are similar. In this video, I gave you a lot of information on what to practice to progress as efficiently as possible. So let me summarize everything so you can perhaps screenshot this or come back to this so it's easy to remember. The first part is about your practice routine, and this comes down to having 50% of your time into a sort of technique drill. And the other part should be about having a Bach piece and then a piece of choice. But the goal is to memorize them as quickly as possible and just improve your technique by working on the hardest parts and keep recycling pieces so you can just play as much repertoire as possible. And then a lot of the same issues will come up, which you should keep practicing in the same ways. For unevenness, fix your finger strength, which is just the same method as you're doing with the technique drills. And then secondly, for hand imbalances, practice hands separate and do this until you can play both hands as if they're their own piece. If you're playing rushed, add in a metronome. And lastly, if you're playing tense, just constantly remind yourself to practice without tension. This may literally seem too good to be true, but just constantly remind yourself to reduce tension all throughout the piece. And if you consistently do this over days, your hands will naturally be more relaxed. And then the final key of the puzzle for anything you do is just to practice slowly and consistently over time. And then I guarantee you that literally within 1 year, you'll be able to reach those dream pieces like Fantasie Impromptu and the Third Moonlight Sonata. I'm not saying you will be able to play them to perfection, but just getting to the notes as quickly as possible could be vital because once you're there, progress will start snowballing because it'll become more and more enjoyable as you go on.